Hi, my lovelies. Tabby here from tabbies.ca. And today I have John Cole, artist. How are
Well,
you, John?
I'm doing fantastic, Tabby. Thank you for having me on your show. First of all, I'm
Yeah,
really
I'm,
looking forward to this conversation.
I'm really excited to have you here. I really feel like I connect to you. I don't know. I've never met you before except for now, but I feel a little bit of familiarity, I guess, between us.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So can you tell us a bit about what you do? I know it's very vast what you've been doing, but can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Well, sure. Yeah. So I am an artist, and I've really only, labeled myself that over the last year or so. And the reason is because I spent almost 36 years with the United States Coast Guard. I joined when I was 19 years old, and then I retired 3 years ago. And of course, I was in this position of not knowing what I want to be when I grow up, because, when you do something for so long, I mean, it really becomes part of who you are. And I retired out of the service and immediately thought, well, what do I want to do? So the first thing I did, of course, was go back to school. And art is something that I've always had an interest in. When I was in high school back in the 80s, um, I took a number of art classes and really enjoyed this. Matter of fact, I thought I was going to graduate high school and then go to like an art college or something like that. But that never happened. Instead, I decided to get married right away. And then, of course, join the service, and then my life changed. But yeah, over the last year or so, I've decided art is really the thing that I'm most passionate about. So, leveraging all that instruction that I received from the 80s, and then, of course, the degree program was in graphic design, um, decided to just focus on that. So, really, right now, my big push is podcasting. Back in February of this year, I decided to start something that I call Art Talk. And what I do is I bring on new artists, I bring on those folks that have an interest in art. And what I really like about it is my own definition of what qualifies as art. And what I mean by that is, if you think about it, and I think, you can't argue with it, everything we do has a creative aspect to it, right? Whether
Agreed.
or not we're working, or we're raising a family, or, we're doing, if we're fishing, for heaven's sakes, right? Fishing is an art form combined with a science. And that really opens the door to really get people interested in what other people are interested in. And my hope is that they'll try something and really enjoy it, and then have fun with it.
No, and that's a great way to be. And I really feel that I think art permeates every facet of our lives. You were talking about even fishing, and it's true. How you put that worm on your hook, how you talk to your children,
Mhm.
the language that you use, all of it is very artistic.
Right.
Um, and I love that you cover so many bases with your art. Like you've done all this exploratory kind of work with your own creativity. Um, everything. Like I love that you sew. I know I'm quite partial to sewing, but
Mhm.
um, right now you're doing the brush. Oh, what are they called? Brush scrolls?
I'm
Brush.
calling them brush snugs.
Right. Yes.
Right.
I was an S.
Yep.
But I love that. I've often thought about doing something like that with pencil crayons for my youngest guy because he just loses them. He wants to hold them and then he loses them in the car and I never find them again. But it's a great way to kind of combine your passions because you paint a lot.
I do, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any on the walls behind me. But on either side of my office here, I've got both acrylic paintings and some oil paintings. I um, started I started acrylic painting about 5 years ago, when, prior to me getting out of the Coast Guard, my last unit was Boston, Massachusetts. Prior to that was Honolulu, Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got to spend 3 years living on Oahu, which was amazing. It's just a totally amazing place. But towards the end of that 3-year tour, while I was there, I thought, well, let's try painting again, right? So I ended up dabbling with acrylics, which was really my predominant painting style for quite a while. And then I thought I would try oil. And have you oil painted or acrylic painted
Yes,
and all
I
that
have.
stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, I've used both acrylic and oil. I haven't done a lot of watercolor.
Yeah, me
Um,
either. Yeah.
it's something I'd like to try though because I love how wispy it is, you
Mhm.
know. But I haven't done the watercolor yet. But I have done acrylic and oils.
Yeah, and there's a significant difference between the two. Acrylics dries faster, oil takes a little more time to dry. But I'm finding that the oil painting, although it's a little bit maybe higher up on that scale in terms of uh, technique, right? It's a little
Yeah.
more complicated because you are dealing with, paints that don't dry fast. Um, I love it. I mean, the richness of the colors that you can get from oil paintings, the ability to blend colors, in a smoother
Yep.
fashion, because acrylics, it's a little harder to work with. But yeah, I mean, acrylics, oil. I have done a little bit of watercolor, but like you, that's a challenging one. Watercolor, I think, it takes a lot of practice. Well, they all do, but you know what I mean.
They definitely do. Like
Yeah.
the one thing I found with oil was you had to be very careful because with acrylics, I like to blend. Like I like doing skyscapes.
Hmm,
So I really like blending colors.
right.
And I like that the acrylics dry really fast so I can put like a lot of pink in this side and then move to a different color and not have to worry about mixing them.
Right.
Whereas with the oils, I had to learn not to make mud.
Yeah, and I think it was on I want to say it was either TikTok or YouTube, and I don't know why I never thought about this, but about the idea of combining the two. And what I mean is some folks, they'll do their base painting using acrylics because it dries fast. And of course, acrylic can give you some bold colors as well. And then you
Yeah,
do your detail work with oil on top of that.
really.
I never thought about that. I haven't tried it yet, but it makes sense. I mean, it's certainly doable. So that might be something to try it out sometime and see how it goes.
Yeah. I wonder how well it would adhere over time. Like, I wonder if that, because they are kind of like a different medium, right? Like the acrylic's
Right.
kind of water based, but the oil is a linseed usually.
Right.
I wonder how that would work. But
I don't
that's an
know.
idea though. That's
It is. It is. It's absolutely an idea. So it's like,
I love experimenting with stuff. I like finding out what you can do and what you shouldn't do. Like sometimes you experiment and you're like, oh well, that's a flop. We'll just
yeah.
throw that one out.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that. Speaking of experimenting, my wife and I went down to the basement because we've got an unfinished basement in this house. So that's kind of where we do our messy art, like acrylic pouring and stuff like that. We won't do it up here. The last thing we want to do. But we thought, how about that technique where you lay crayons on a canvas and then use a heat gun to like make them all uh for an experiment, we'll give it an A+, but for results, it was absolutely horrible. Absolutely
Oh,
horrible. You know what I mean? But and of course now our basement smells like burning crayons. So it goes.
hey, you live and learn, right? I've
Yeah,
always
exactly.
wondered about that because I have a 5-year-old. I was like, maybe we could try doing something like
Mhm.
that. But yeah, maybe I'll wait till he's a little older.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. But it was fun to try, and I think that's the important thing when it comes to not only my podcast but your podcast as well. Because
Yeah,
you do bring artists on, and it's the same thing with social media, and that's I think the good side of social media is that it does generate all these interesting ideas. And like last night, I was speaking with Tim Kidd. He's a woodworking expert that lives in Georgia, and he started doing that about 4 or 5 years ago. And that whole idea of that word innovation, right? Innovation doesn't mean that you're creating something out of nothing. Typically, innovation is taking various ideas and then combining them in a new way.
yep,
And I think that that's really the beauty of folks like us that talk about art, that talk about creativity, that look at all these different aspects, because it's funny how a lot of these things, you know, can be used together to produce some really, really cool things, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
I had an artist on a little while ago, and he did collaborations with other artists,
Oh, there you go. Yep.
and it's really unique when you see. two different styles kind of mesh together to
Yeah.
create something else.
Right.
Like, and I love that idea of these two people collaborating. Like, my middle child does music and she collaborates with a bunch of local artists. And it's always intriguing to see because the music that comes is not the music you expect from her. It has a slightly different edge. And I love that newness to it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's spot on. It's exactly what I'm talking about. Right. It's yeah. It really it's like that idea also of the power of teams. Right. Teams. If you got a really well formed team, you tend to have better results than perhaps you or I working individually. That synergy, that synergistic type of thing. Um, so that's cool. That's really cool.
Well, you have to stretch to grow, right?
I
So there's
absolutely, absolutely do.
nothing will stretch you more than having someone else tell you what their opinion is.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No kidding. That I agree.
So, what would you say your dominant art form is?
Well, I would say my dominant art form um, is probably the thing. I would say that the thing that if I could be best known for something, right? Because again, I've only been doing this now for about a year, really focusing on it. But if I were to, the answer that I would give to that question is my pet portraits,
Yeah.
because I do pet portraits using a pointillistic style, and I think I don't know if anybody else is doing it that way, that I've seen. And I've, like most of us, we want to go out on the internet and see who else is doing what we want to do, right? I
Yep.
don't think I've come across that technique at all. So that I'm probably is my most dominant, or what I would say is the most popular one that people seem to want from me. But I'll be honest with you, where I struggle the most with my art, I think there's two places I struggle. Number one, if I paint something that I really like,
Yep.
it's not going anywhere. It's hanging on my wall, right? And then the other piece, of course, I think that a lot of artists tend to struggle with is, is it good enough?
Oh yeah.
And I think that those two areas there kind of prevent me a little bit from really blossoming and producing these things that people seem to enjoy. Um, but that's something I'm aware of, which is beautiful. I do have a coach. I've got a cognitive behavioral coach that I've been working with now almost 3 years now since I exited the service. She's wonderful. She's an expert in her field, and she's been extremely helpful. If anything, getting me over that hump of going from this, organized service, the Coast Guard, back into civilian life, which was a challenge for a lot of veterans. you know and I would argue it's probably a challenge for teachers and mechanics, or all these people that really have dedicated so much of their life to doing one thing, and then all of a sudden it all gets, you upset the apple cart and everything changes on you, because it affects you and it affects the people around you, right? um, but yeah, yeah, I think those are the two big challenges that I have. They're either too good and I don't want to get rid of them, or they're not quite good enough and then I don't know what to do with them. So, but somewhere in there is the right answer for me, and that's the beauty of what I'm doing, because I'm not going to give up. I love it, so I'm going to just keep doing it, and eventually all this will pay off. For me, it's not really about making money. It's not about necessarily pleasing other people. It's about you know me doing a painting that you like and it gives you enjoyment, and that's really all I'm after with what I do. So
Yep. And it's about personal growth too, right? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely,
um,
absolutely.
I find a lot of artists be included when I'm doing when I'm creating something. Generally, it's when I'm really, highly emotional, either good emotion or bad emotion. Like something has inspired me, and I think inspiration could be either way.
Mhm.
Either I could be very like peaked in a anxiety way and I need to get those feelings out, or I'm like really excited, or something's got me nonchalant, like nostalgic.
Right.
Like I find that the art for me is very emotional based.
Yeah, yeah, for me it's I don't For me, it's not that. I tend to use I do my best work when I'm just enjoying that process.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
now my wife, on the other hand, she does painting as well, and she's more in line of what you're saying, where when she's at a particular emotional state, that's when she really does these really interesting pieces. Um, for me, as a male who spent most of his life in an organization that didn't necessarily want you to express your feelings, I mean, the last thing you want to do is say, "Oh my God, that's so sad. I can't do it." That's not how any military works. Canadian military or the United States military, right? That they don't work like that. Um, so when you don't have that connection with your own emotions for so many years, that type of outlet just doesn't work. If I get super super emotional, the last thing that I want to do is sit down and do a piece of art. But there is value to that. There is value to that, right? Because as I see through what my wife does, she's able to, in some cases, resolve a lot of the issues that she's dealing with at that moment. And it almost sounds like that's kind of what you're saying as well, right?
Yeah, when I'm really like when I'm highly emotional and I do the art, whatever art it happens to be, sculpting or painting. Generally, quilting is it can be, but generally it's the painting and the sculpting, like the more free form kind of things.
Right.
And then when I'm done, it's almost like a drain. Like I almost feel drained.
Yeah.
Like like I've used more energy than I had allotted to give to that,
Hmm. Hmm.
which isn't a bad thing. It's
No, it's
but
not.
it is, you know,
I mean, it's therapeutic. I mean, I think there's a lot of
yeah.
organizations that use art to help people, face their previous traumas and move forward. I think it's great. It's just, for me, I'm just not at that place. But again, it goes back to this whole conversation where it really doesn't matter, I think, where you are. It's the key thing is you're being creative, I think, because
Yep.
creativity is an outlet just like anything else.
Oh, definitely. So did
Yeah.
you find your years as the Coast Guard kind of helped to form your art at all?
I think, if anything, from an inspiration perspective, because you mentioned that word earlier, inspiration.
Yeah.
For me, I my inspiration comes from primarily nature. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I spent a week camping at the Superstition Mountains in Arizona.
Okay.
It was like 95, 96 degrees. I didn't do any painting there, but what I brought back was feeling of creating. This feeling of creating is what I brought back. So that's, um, yeah,
Well, you probably wouldn't want to paint there anyways. It'd probably melt in
yeah,
90-degree weather.
mhm, exactly.
So when did you learned to paint in college in the 80s?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was during high school in the 80s. It was a series of art courses I took because I think in my last couple years of school, if I remember correctly, we had to pick electives or something like that. I mean, it's been a long time. I don't really remember too much. But I do know that, that's where I first learned a little bit about, um, acrylic painting, pastels, using pastels, soft pastels specifically, pencil drawing, working with pen and ink, things like that. And then that really was it for 30 years or so. So it kind of just sat on the back burner. The good thing is because I've always been or considered myself a creative person, what I would do is I would use that, um, during my job.
Okay.
My first tour in the Coast Guard was aboard a ship in California. So we spent a lot of time, sailing the high seas up in the Bering Sea off the Aleutian Islands and over to Japan and down past the equator. So, this was prior to these really great computer systems we have here. But I still was able to do like pen and ink drawings, and we would make a ship's newspaper. So I would do the drawings for that. Um,
Uh,
and then as time went on and the service got updated computer equipment, I then start dabbling in web design, especially in the 90s when that the whole thing
yep.
started to blossom. So, throughout that whole career, I still maintain kind of like a like a toe in the water,
Yeah.
you know. But as far as actually doing any artwork during that period, I really didn't do any, you know.
But
So yeah.
I do want to ask because I'm curious myself. When
Mhm.
did you learn how to sew? Did you learn to sew as a child or as an adult or
Yeah, sewing, right? So that's also just an interesting, really short story. I wanted to learn how to sew because I wanted to make costumes. You know,
okay,
like the big
yeah.
costumes, like I'm gonna dress up as Mickey Mouse, so I have all this stuff. And this was probably about 3 years ago. So my sister-in-law came over to teach me how to sew. And if this is typical me. So she wanted me to, I think, sew like a pillowcase, which is basically along the top, down the bottom, leave the opening, right? Flip it inside out, iron it, and boom, you're done. You got a pillowcase. But no, I'm like, no, I'm gonna make a shirt. So believe it or not, my first ever sewing project was to make a button down shirt, and I mean, it
Oh,
wasn't perfect.
wow.
It wasn't perfect. I mean, there's some places where the collar shifted and stuff. But that's kind of the person I am. It's like I I don't necessarily like to start at the beginning. I tend to start, later on, and then try to hopefully figure it out. I mean, luckily it's worked a lot of the times. I mean, there have been some issues where you just can't do that. You really legitimately have to start at the beginning of something. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it was only about 3 years ago, and it was because I wanted to make costumes. And there's something really cool about that too, where you can just make things out of fabric. I mean, that's pretty cool.
It is. It really is neat when you can make something like I make purses, I made stuffies, and I make a lot of stuff. But I love the fact that you can have this flat piece of fabric,
Mhm.
and then you come back and this fabric is shaped, and you're
Yeah,
holding it. It has stuff inside of it, and it's pretty, and or you give it to your kid and he can snuggle it because it's not flat anymore. It's a whole shape and it's full of love.
yeah, yeah. Actually, as a matter of fact, in October of last year, I was a speaker at the Behind the Power event, which is run by my cognitive coach, Allison Roberts, in Atlanta, Georgia. So for 3 days, they invite people in. I got to do a speech, in front of a nice audience and things like that, and I got to write a chapter in a best-selling book, which was really cool. And I for the 3 days, I ended up making a shirt for each of those 3 days.
Oh, it's so
So yeah,
cool.
and I tell you, fabric, right? I mean, like the quilt behind you, you've get these really wonderful and sometimes extremely vivid, um, fabrics. And one of the shirts I wore looked like paint splatters. But you talk about a vivid orange. I mean, you could have probably saw me the next state over. It was that bright. But it was cool because it was my shirt during an event I was participating in, speaking in front of people, and I had this bright color shirt on it. It was really cool. Really cool.
I love that you started with the button-up shirt though, like because
Yeah.
that is really fundamentally the hardest piece of clothing, like regular clothing to make. I mean, you can get your tailored coats and stuff, but the crisp collar
Yeah.
button-down shirt is, one of the most hardest items to make. So it's kind of cool that that's how you started. You just dove in 2 feet deep.
Go right in. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, sometimes stuff works out, sometimes it doesn't. But, I mean, I never really get discouraged. I mean, there's probably part of me does, right? Because if you want something to look good, you put a lot of effort into it. You'd like to at least hang it on your wall and go, "Hey, I made that." Doesn't always work. I think I probably have disposed of more, really poor paintings than I have on my walls right now, just because they were like really bad. But every time you try something, you learn something new, and then you either learn how not to do something or you learn how to do something. So there's really never an end to that learning curve. And again, that's what makes it so neat, you know. So
Out the It's the best part about it. The whole
yeah,
time you're creating, you're growing inside.
right, right.
So when did you decide that you wanted to take all this creative inspiration and your experience with art and really try to focus? I know you said it's about a year ago you really started to focus in on your art. So what kind of made you do that? Like make it into kind of like a business?
I think it's because I have options, just like most of us, right?
Yeah.
You know, what after my military career, I've got degrees, for example, in information technology. I've got a master's degree in information technology. But the thing with that is that it's really not necessarily a joyful pursuit for me. I mean, I did it. I got paid for it. It was great. I helped a lot of people, and I don't have any issue with that. But that was for them. It wasn't necessarily for me. As a matter of fact, the whole degree that I have, I didn't necessarily go out and want that. It just was a natural evolution of my job over the 3 decades I was with the government, right? So I just kind of fell into that. Um, and then, of course, for the 2 years after retirement, I really struggled with what my direction was going to be, right? Should I, go work at Walmart? Should I, be a greeter at Home Depot? Should I look for a corporate job? Which, from my resume, if you read it, I could walk into a corporate job. But none of that made me feel good, you
And
know?
after having so much time, you must have decided this needs to be for you.
That's exactly right, Tabby. It's exactly right. I needed to do something that I enjoyed for me. And if the benefit is that other people enjoy it, then that makes it even better. But if they don't, that's okay because I'm having fun doing it, you know?
Yep.
Um, but like I was saying earlier in the show here, I still have some hurdles I have to cross, right? I'm still not there yet. I think there's a part of me that is still afraid of changing direction and actually like doing it, for the rest of my life or however long that I want to do it, right? Um, but as each day goes by and the more things that I try, the more conversations I have, like the one we're having tonight, which is really therapeutic for me, just having this conversation, right? It's very, very helpful, and it helps me get one step closer to really enjoying that passion, which is to create and paint and do all that stuff. Yeah.
That's one of the things I really love about this show is generally when I finish the interviews, I'm so inspired to do something. Like I spend the rest of the night making something because I
Yeah.
just have to create after like
Right.
hearing
Right.
all these people talk about it. And I don't know, it inspires me really to hear everyone's stories.
Yeah, I can
And
see that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I was saying, when I had Tim Kidd out of the woodworker, I'm thinking, man, I wonder if I should go out and get a table saw because it just
yeah,
looks so cool what he's doing, right? I think I want to go make something too.
well, it does. We were talking earlier before the show about how I wanted to do pottery,
Mhm.
and it's hard though because you know if you've seen it on sale, like if I seen a pottery kiln on sale, I'd be tempted to buy it. Like I have to be careful. Like
Mhm.
it wouldn't fit in here for one, and my husband might question another
Right, right.
thing.
Yeah, yeah. Just say you're baking bread or something. He'll never know. Mhm. Maybe not.
Well, I actually used to make bread all the time when the older boys were little, so he'd know. He'd be like, "That doesn't look like a bread maker, honey."
Yeah. Actually, you know what? In 2 weeks, my niece just graduated Johnson and Wales, which is a culinary academy in Rhode Island, and she's going to be on the show, and we're going to be talking about baking and cakes.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
My son is actually he went for to be a chef. He's changed gears because him and a few of his friends are running a company now.
Mhm.
But he actually went for a chef, so that's kind of unique.
Yeah.
It is nice to have someone that can cook though around.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and she's a wonderful baker as well. I mean, she's really, really talented. So it's going to be really fun to have her on the show.
And it is an art. Like I know I've had people say, "Well, cooking's not really an art."
Oh,
Cooking and baking are both arts, very much so. Like if you go to a five-star restaurant and you get that plate, that is an art form.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, baking isn't in essence chemistry, first of all, right? So there's a
Yep.
science aspect to it, and you're absolutely right. The plating, the design work. I mean, because we eat with our eyes first, right? I think somebody said that
Yes.
at some point. And if it doesn't look good, you're not going to want to eat it. So you really have to have that creative talent to make people want to eat your food.
It's true. It's
Yeah.
really, really true. I'm
Mhm.
actually gonna check that out because I love baking. Like I don't do it as much anymore because I have so many other things to do, but I loved making cakes and stuff when the boys were little, and I loved doing all of that. So I like the art of that.
Yeah,
When I was
yeah,
in college, I used to check out all the sugar candy treats that they'd make. They had them in behind glass, these huge doves, and they were over the top. They
yeah.
were over the top. So what inspires you to keep doing this?
I think what inspires me the most is stepping back from something that I'm working on and really loving what I'm doing. It's as simple as that. I think, you know, it's almost like I'm inspiring myself sometimes, which is, I guess, kind of weird. But I recently did a painting of a whale, and I think it's on the website.
That
Um,
big blue.
yeah, I mean, it's funny that sometimes it's funny for me because sometimes I look at myself and it's like I look at that painting, I'm like, I cannot believe I did that. It's almost like it's somebody else, which is in and of itself a strange thing to say, but I'd argue that a lot of artists probably look at that the same way. It's like, how did that come out of me? And of course I do tend towards the realism, the realism type look. My wife is a little bit better with the abstract type approach. I've tried abstract a few times, but for me, which is really weird, you'd think it would be easier, but for me, it seems harder.
I feel you there. I have a hard
Yeah,
time with the abstract stuff. My husband keeps saying, "Oh, you should try it. You should try it." But it just feels very foreign to me, and I have a hard time with that.
yeah, but yeah, that's really I kind of inspire myself by the things that I'm able to do. And again, that's not to stroke my own ego or say that I'm great or anything, but when you paint a picture of a whale and then you step back and you're like, damn, that looks like a whale. Who knew I could do that, right? So which then motivates you to try something else. I mean, I think one of my favorite subjects to paint are seascapes,
Okay. Yeah.
but but I'm finding they're also the most challenging. So I've probably done maybe, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 over the last year and a half or so, using acrylics or oils or even watercolor. And I'm not quite there yet, but with each iteration, they seem to be getting better. So eventually, I'm going to have this grand seascape on my wall. Of course, you'll never get to buy it because it's going to be hanging on my wall. But um,
You could
but
make prints for us. You
that's true, right? Yeah, yeah, I could do that. But yeah, I think that's what really keeps me going is stepping back and saying, "Wow, I did that," and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is the scary thing. Like that whole feeling of imposter syndrome
Hmm.
when you make something and then you're like you worry about it, or like if you make a mistake on something and then you're like, what am I doing here? Like why am I even trying this? Like did you ever get like do you ever get that feeling?
I do, and that's probably why I don't paint as often as I'd like to, because and you're right, that's a legitimate fear. The fear is that what I put on the canvas or the paper or whatever isn't going to be what I envision it to be. And that to me scares the crap out of me because, um, it's like if I'm going to paint your portrait, I mean, you want the portrait to look like you, right?
Yep.
I think one of the biggest pain points for me happened about a year or so ago with the pet portraits, right? Because the ones that I have posted online, I mean, they're not they're good. They look like the dogs, right?
Yeah, they are good.
Yeah, but I did one and I sent the picture to the client and the client's like, that's not my dog, and I think, and she didn't mean it in a bad way,
Yeah.
because I stepped back and I'm looking at it going, yeah. So I ended up redoing the painting, but that's just an example of that fear manifest. Now, in reality, I don't know why I was so afraid of that, because it didn't look like her dog. I even saw it didn't look like her dog, so I redid it and it looked like her dog. I mean, it wasn't like brain surgery, right? Um, but the fear piece, I think, is real. It is real. Yeah, and the imposter syndrome that you mentioned. Yeah, sometimes I do feel like that. It's like, you know, but I
Nice.
persevere, and that's the thing. I persevere.
Well, that's the big thing, right? If you're able to pick yourself back up and keep going, then it's fine. You're better for it.
Mhm.
But I mean, like I struggle with it sometimes too. Like it's you. I think that there's this social piece with human nature that people don't really think about too much, where we really want to be accepted by our peers. We
Mhm.
really want to be, um, we want our lives to have value, and value not just to us but to everyone around us. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's hard when you feel like you're scared you're not doing enough.
Right.
But you can never say that. You do way too much. You do tie dye, resin, the wood burning. I love your wood burning, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah,
The I was
that's more, I was gonna say that's more of a winter activity for me because wood burning upstairs in the house is probably not the best thing given ventilation. So that ends up being a winter sport. So I go down to the basement, I do the wood burning.
I used to have a well, I have a wood burner still in Ontario. When we moved to New Brunswick, I didn't bring it with me. It wasn't like I chose one craft to bring with me, which was my hair bows.
Hmm.
But I still haven't gone back to get my wood burner, and it kills me sometimes because I look at all this pyro stuff and I'm like, ah, I just want to burn something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
I've dabbled in, geez, a whole bunch of different things.
the gold leaf just recently.
Gold leaf just recently, yeah, which is interesting. So that's one that I'd like to, take one step further and kind of integrate that perhaps with oil as well. You know,
Oh,
do the oil painting of whatever and then use that gold leaf to accent, which I think would look pretty cool.
that.
And
Yeah,
then at one point, Tabby, I thought, what about illuminated manuscript pages? Hmm. You don't see a lot of that much anymore. But,
yeah,
that's an art form, dating back to what, the 14th century, 13th century,
yep.
that is just absolutely gorgeous. You see some of these illuminated pages and they're phenomenally pretty, but they use a lot of that gold leaf to really bring out the characteristics of the letter design or something like that. So that's something that it might evolve into at some point too, which would be pretty cool.
I actually love all of those old kind of manuscripts and stuff. Like I love, especially the ones that were written by the monks in the 14th, 15th centuries. Like
Yep.
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a geek. I love history,
Mhm.
but you have to know where you've been to know where you're going, right? So
Yes. A
because
and
I
there's a lot of those techniques that people just don't really do much of, or it's a very, very small pocket of folks that do it. So sometimes bringing that or incorporating that into contemporary work, again, goes back to that word innovation. Now you're looking at something that might be totally new, based on old techniques and new techniques. I mean, the sky's the limit. I mean, that's the cool thing about it.
oh yeah, and you can incorporate anything into your
Mhm.
work. You can really make it your own,
Yep.
honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like I have one more question that I ask everybody. Um, actually, I guess I'll ask it now. The last meet I did, the hydro went out, so I'm a little worried now that the hydro just might flicker at any moment. But what would you say to anyone who wanted to kind of follow in your footsteps, if they wanted to start experimenting with the art and and they weren't really ready to kind of hem in on one specific thing? What would you tell them as an emerging artist?
Well, I think it's try new things. I think that, you walk in any Michael's store, any Hobby Lobby, and I don't know what you guys got up in New Brunswick, but whatever, when you walk in and you see this wide variety of different artistic media, and again, like we're talking, we're not just restricting ourselves to your traditional art like paints and drawing and stuff like that, but the fabric, the yarn, I mean, I've done some of that as well, some knitting and things like that, although that's not my favorite thing. But the point I'm making is that when you walk into a store, I think that you can get very overwhelmed right off the bat. I mean, where do you start, right? What do you pick up to try? And I think my answer for anybody that's looking at that or would like to, using your words, follow in my footsteps, is number one, don't spend a lot of money. I mean, you know, look at something that might interest you. Don't spend a lot of money on it to try it out and see if you like it. And if you like it, don't give up. You know, um, I think everybody has the talent to do amazing art. I think where we run into problems that we just don't think we're good enough, and I don't think that's true at all. I think everybody has creativity, and if you want your work to look like Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, well, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some practice, some time, and some perseverance. And that's really the key thing. Everything that I do, even the things that are hanging on my wall, they're not perfect, you know, but I think if I were to repaint them all today, having a year, 2 years since I painted or done some of the work, they would be better because you just rinse and repeat, right? So you just don't give up, just keep trying. And again, if you don't like pen and paper, try painting. If you don't like painting, pick up some fabric and try sewing. So there's a lot of different options out there. There's something for everybody.
Oh, I agree.
Yep.
Completely agree.
Yep.
And if you don't like any of the mediums the way they are, mix them together.
Mix them together. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, what would you say makes you unique?
What makes me unique? I think what makes me unique is that I have interests in pretty much everything. Everything. I play a little guitar. I play a little keyboard. I do artistic things. I'm an author. I've self-published 15 books, although nobody knows that they're out there. Trust me, they're out there. Um, but I was a best-selling author with Allison Roberts through Amazon. Right, her book went to #1, and I was part of it. Um, I am going to be writing a book next year on my own, so I've got somebody to walk me through that process. So that's going to be cool. Um, I like butterflies. I like rainbows. I like you name it. I like everything. Camping. I love camping. I mean, you name it, I love it. So I think that's what makes me unique is that there isn't anything I don't like, other than Brussels sprouts. Those I don't like.
My husband doesn't like Brussels sprouts, and I make him eat them because I like them. So it's just that, that strikes a chord with me. No, and I love that you say that because I feel the same kind of way where I really do love everything. Like
Mhm.
almost anything in the world you can find some shred of goodness or happiness or life in. Um, so one thing I do want to talk to you about is your podcast. How did you come up with the idea of being the podcast again? Did you just decide you wanted to show everyone's art?
Yeah, the podcast. I'm going to be actually speaking about the podcast this October in Atlanta. I'm writing a speech
Oh,
talking about that. Um, I'd thought about doing a podcast for a couple years. I just love the idea of what we're doing right here of communicating with people. I communicated for years in the service, and then when I got out, I kind of lost that community. And I'm like, a podcast would be a really cool way to talk to people. And I probably sat on that idea for about 2 years, afraid of saying something stupid, of the equipment failing, nobody's going to watch. I mean, every single thought that you ever had in your head that first day you started your podcast was going through my mind. And the only reason I hit that go live button is because I bought an arm for my microphone. I know that sounds silly,
no, it
but
doesn't.
but for me, in order to really, jump that gap between where I was and where I wanted to be, was taking little small actions that would kind of almost force me to do it, right? Because I use StreamYard as my provider. You're using Skype here, but I went out
Yeah.
and I bought that subscription. Like, now I got to do it. I invested money. Now I've got to do this podcast, right? Of course, that's not what I was thinking. What I was really, really excited about it. But then the idea of talking about art was based on that idea that we talked about earlier, where we have a lot of, and I know personally a lot of people that have talked about doing art but never did because they were afraid of doing it. So I thought, well, what if my show brought on these folks that are, like I was saying, new artists, those folks that really want to share something about their specialty area. Like I had Audrey Zimpel on a couple weeks ago, and she's a beauty expert, right? Um, because really, if one person watches and says, something, I think I want to try this. That's all I'm looking for, you know. So,
Yep.
but that's what got me going was just that idea of communicating, and then hopefully motivating people to try some new things.
Yeah. That's sharing the love, right? We
Yeah,
got to share the
exactly.
love.
Yeah, yeah,
No, I feel you there. Like I want to help other people show all their amazing things to the
yeah.
world. Like I love what people are doing, and I want other people to love what they're doing.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, exactly, I hear you, yeah.
But yeah, I love what you're doing though. I really appreciate this. And just for my own curiosity, what's your favorite medium of everything you're doing? The resin, the tie dye, the
Right.
everything. What's your favorite one?
Well,
Like
right now,
not anything else, but what you like doing the best.
what I like doing the best is the oil paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a weird thing because I mean, you talk about resistance. I mean, I resisted oil paints for a very long. I was afraid of them, scared completely of doing oil painting. But now that I've done a couple, um, yeah, I love the results that I get, even if the paintings don't look that great. Just the whole technique and the whole process of doing an oil painting is just very, very cool. It's my favorite.
I My absolute favorite painting that I've ever made was an oil painting.
Oh,
It
really?
was yeah, it was actually a picture I took of a sunset with thistles, like
Hmm.
fully bloomed thistles out. And so it's the shadow of the thistles against the sunset.
Oh,
And
very nice. Yeah.
it's by far my favorite painting. And I've done a fair bit of paintings.
Yeah, I'm actually, future events, what comes next for me. One of the things I'm considering doing is, and I think if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see towards the bottom there's some live, like hour-long live things that I did maybe 2 years ago. And the idea behind that was to have folks join me on Zoom, and then I would be live doing art, and then they would do art too. And
Okay.
the turnout wasn't that bad. Um, but what I didn't feel comfortable with was um, doing it live and then things don't go right, and then part of me's thinking I'm teaching them the wrong way, and that's not what I intended. I don't think it came across that way. But what I'm thinking about doing as a next step is putting together an oil painting tutorial series where I go through my approach to oil painting. Right, because
Okay.
everybody seems to do oil painting differently. Like some people, suggest you do like an underpainting first and like a sepia color, and then let that dry and then paint your colors on top. Other people say you should paint your darks first. Some say paint your lights first. I think the answer is there is no right answer. There's no right or wrong to that. Um, but I think that would be my next thing is to put together a video tutorial on how I would do like one of my koi fish or something like that. Because I think I would have fun doing it. And I think people would get value out of it.
Hey, I'd watch it. I love your koi fish. They're gorgeous, especially that second blue one. I love
Uh,
blue is one of my colors. So,
hmm,
but no, I think that's awesome. I have done before a few videos of making stuff for my tabbies,
mhm.
and it's something that I'm going to put more emphasis on once my son goes to school. It's really hard to create during daylight hours when there's
Yeah.
a mommy speaker around me, but
Yeah.
but I know what you mean by that. Like you want to make sure you don't want to give people the wrong things, right?
Well, right, yeah, and I think when you're doing a demonstration live, it's also hard. I also found it difficult to focus on the people. So and I think at one point I might have had, it wasn't a huge number, maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 people on live with me with Zoom. And it's hard to, you know, do what you're doing, showing the techniques, talking about it, and still monitoring what they're doing if they have questions, let alone the
Yeah.
technological side of it. Since then I've gotten some additional equipment that helps me a little bit manage that. Like I've got this
Yep.
controller here where I can turn this light off or turn it back on, which I didn't have before. So, and the kitchen is where we did it, and we had this monstrosity set up with lights and a camera pointing down with multiple camera angles, and my wife ended up having to manage all that.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, I mean, she did perfectly. I mean, it's just exactly what I needed. But from my perspective, I didn't feel like I was giving my clients the attention that they deserved. So I think by doing something, a pre-recorded type series, and then, gussing it up a little bit with some music and all this other stuff, I think might be received a little better. And I think it would be a better way for me to teach.
Yeah. And you could even put that on in a live Zoom call and still be able to answer questions,
Oh yeah,
but
that's
in a
yeah,
more
yeah.
controlled environment.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, I could push that out and then communicate and see what they're doing at the same time. That's a good idea. I like that.
It's an idea I've thought of before for doing my own stuff. Like there's one thing about not being able to do the stuff you want to do, you still think about it, you know? Like,
Yeah, the thoughts don't go anywhere.
yeah, exactly.
Yep.
I have books of writings, of notes and stuff, that things I want to do and things I'd like to do and things that I'm not sure will work. And, you
Mhm.
know, your brain's a powerful thing.
It absolutely is. Yeah, and sometimes you just can't shake certain things until you get them out, right? That's
Oh, I feel that.
yeah. You get
Feel
that
that.
inspiration. You give me a paintbrush and something. I'm gonna sit down and do it. It's I just have to, right? It's almost like you're driven to.
Yeah, and people are like, "Why aren't you talking to me?" You're like, "I'm sorry, I'm not here. I'm thinking
Right.
about doing this thing, and I want you to stop talking so I can leave." Like my
Yeah.
husband will be looking at me like, "What are you thinking about? What do you want?" And I'm like, "I want to leave. I want, I
Yeah.
want to go in my room and shut the
Yeah.
door, honey. I love you, but."
Yeah.
Well, John, I'm really excited that you were here. Like, I really liked talking to you about this. Like, I think I could probably talk to you for a couple of hours easily. I'm
Absolutely.
having a great time with you, honestly. Um, So maybe we'll do this again in the future because I really am enjoying myself. And I like to hear your perspectives too. And it's so unique that you also have a podcast and it revolves around art because I think it gives us a really special understanding of things.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
Like I love artists. Like I love how quirky some of them are and how expressive some of them are. Like I love people really.
Mm.
Like um I was trained in social work and I really love talking to people. I love learning about people and what makes them tick and why. But yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting with you too. So nobody knows this yet, but I'm going to be meeting with you at the end of next month.
Yep. You absolutely are. I can't wait to have you on either.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. It'll be a little bit shorter than this one. You
Yeah.
might
I
have
keep.
to rein me in.
Yeah. I keep mine to 30 minutes. I think 30 minutes seems to be a really good fit for most of the folks I talk to. But I will admit, like I think we're looking up here, we're at an hour. I can't. It feels like 15 minutes, if even. And it's like with mine, I do this live 30-minute broadcast, and it's like okay, it's 1 minute after I look again, it's like almost time's up. It's amazing when you really especially when you connect with somebody, you're connecting and you're having this great conversation. The time just ceases to exist. It's a phenomenal thing. It
It
really
is.
is.
And the same thing happens when you're really into your art too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that whole idea of flow, right? You're in
Yeah,
that
and
flow,
it's so important in whatever you do, art or not.
right?
But so yeah, next time we'll talk about your books and we'll talk about the CGI and your logo creations. You have a lot left to talk about.
Yeah, I forgot about that stuff, believe it or not. But yeah, yeah, and I'd love to come back on anytime. Just let me know.
All right, definitely, because yeah, I feel like I still have a lot to talk to you about.
Cool.
So thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you being here, and I look forward to next month.
I do too. And thanks again.
So anybody who wants to make sure that they catch the next video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye, my lovelies.